Welcome to everybody on LinkedIn Live. We are thrilled to have you here at one of my very favorite of our recurring events, Quarterly Distillations, with the incredible team from the Intel Distillery and Bader Rutter. And we at the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network are thrilled you're here. Thanks for being part of our virtual events. This is virtual event number like 29 or 30 for the year, which is awesome. We really appreciate you sticking with us, keeping this incredible industry we have in Chicagoland together, communicating and talking about sort of the issues of the day and what's going on. That's part of why I love these recurring events. Intel Distillery does such a great job of keeping us right up to speed on what's happening in industry so that we can make sure that it's helping to grow our business and grow the amazing food and beverage industry here in the greater Chicagoland area. Next slide. All right, for those of you who don't know the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network, we are a mission-driven industry organization, about 4 years old. Our job is to bring together the incredible power of the food and beverage industry in the greater Chicagoland area. That is 4,500 companies and over 150,000 people employed in our industry. Our job is to grow the industry, drive innovation, grow the local economy, and create jobs. These things are important every single day. They're even more important in the midst and in the aftermath, if you will, of a global pandemic. If you're interested in becoming a member, reach out, click that link, or just send us a note. We'd love to have you join us. We couldn't do what we do without our members. They are the lifeblood of our network. We have 125 corporate members, including Cornerstone, Premium, our industry members. Again, this is the network. We also have incredible partners. We also have incredible funders, and truly, this is what makes up the amazing, amazing industry here in Chicagoland. And we've especially learned it during COVID, there's just no substitute for what we do in the greater Chicagoland area. So thank you all. We also launched last year our sister organization, our charitable nonprofit called Bigger Table. Bigger Table brings together Chicagoland's food and beverage industry to do amazing things, addressing very specific challenges in our local communities. Food insecurity, we donated 560,000 servings of healthy food to food banks last year. We're going to do 1.5 million this year. Happy to tell you more about that. We're also dealing with unemployment and inclusive economic development. Happy to tell you more. Please go to biggertable.org to find out more. And we always appreciate your tax-deductible donations there as well. Let's get social. The conversation starts here. It continues into into LinkedIn and all of our amazing social media channels. Check out all of this. Start the conversation here and continue. Also, for those here in the room in Zoom, please use the chat and Q&A features to ask questions of the panelists. And throughout, you don't have to remember anything. You don't have to raise your hand. Just type them in there, and we will make sure that we get to all of those questions. Also, we at CFBN hope you'll join us for some upcoming events. On September 14th, we have an in-person happy hour and networking. You may be masked. You may be having cocktails in a straw through a hole in your mask, but we are doing it in person for real, downtown in the West Loop in a very cool space. So we hope that you'll join us. Free to members, I think. My event team might be screaming right now. We also have another few events coming up today. Also, we are so lucky today to have both one of my favorite people who also invented one of my favorite products, Michelle McBride with GoodSport. So, and everybody ask her really hard questions. She loves them. She just really gets off on the challenge for sure. Welcome, Michelle. We're glad you're here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Dennis to get serious and have fun.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Alan, and thanks everyone for logging on. Welcome to August, and welcome to this quarterly distillation from Bader Rutter's Intel Distillery. In addition to the team running down the top 10 trending topics of Q2, And frankly, the persistent role the pandemic continues to play in basically every aspect of the food supply chain. As Alan said, we're extremely happy to be joined by our friend and featured guest, Michelle McBride. She is the founder and CEO of GoodSport. Go to goodsport.com, get the story, get the background, but you don't have to do that because she's here and she'll share it with us. For those of you who don't know, GoodSport is a natural source of rapid and lasting sports hydration, but it's powered by the goodness of milk. So it's a very innovative product. It's really amazing. It's remarkable. It tastes great. So we at Bader Rutter are extremely proud to be able to help on it a little bit. And we're really excited because Michelle's story is just fascinating. So stay tuned for that. But let's start with the previous quarter and all the trending topics that the Intel Distillery has observed with our daily review. Overall, the theme that seemed to emerge has been supply chain resilience. The pandemic's disruptions came to a head this past quarter, prompting reevaluation of food production practices, and shortages just interrupted the flow of everything from tapioca pearls to chicken wings, which are two of the most important parts of my personal diet. Given the recent news of surging outbreaks driven by new variants, this doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon, and we're not out of the woods, which is kind of a bummer. Anyway, to kick things off, let's go to the architect and director of the Intel Distillery, my friend, Nick Prasnowski. Nick?
Hey, thanks, Dennis, and welcome, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, we're going to run through some events that took place in Q2 up until now. And just as a refresher for those who maybe haven't joined one of these, our group, the Intel Distillery at Bader Rutter, consistently ranks the top 10 topics throughout food and agriculture. So from a macro perspective, we take a look at, what some of the most prominent voices in the industry have to say. So I'm going to attempt to walk and chew gum here and share my own screen as I go. We have a report that looks something like this here, the quarterly report that kind of dives deep into each of those 10 topics. Looking at the most recent quarter here, Q2, stewardship had led the way. That's environmental issues, followed by the weather and climate change are the three topics that I'm going to run you through today. This, by the way, is a bump chart that we referred to as the spaghetti chart. So we've got this information going back several years, looking at some of these major flows in the discussion on food and agriculture. So Kyle will pop a link in the chat here to register for this. All of this is free of charge and there for our friends and partners to talk about kind of the trending topics in food and agriculture. So looking at, I'm going to just talk about some, not necessarily the top topics, but this kind of trifecta of stewardship, the weather and climate changes. They all are very interdependent on one another. So for stewardship, we're really interested in the food industry, the most influential voices in the food industry talking about things like Earth Day. That back in April was a big opportunity for big brands to make certain policy announcements and supply chain requirements that, largely reflect upon environmental issues. For example, PepsiCo put forth this positive ag agenda, and General Mills announced 100% sustainable sourcing of its top 10 ingredients. So lots going around Earth Day. WOTUS is another big regulatory rule. It stands for the Waters of the United States. It's part of the Clean Water Act. That pit the farmers, the American Farm Bureau Federation versus the EPA, massive debates and discussions over water regulation on farms. That took place. And then groups like the National Dairy Council, they took steps to minimize water pollution. And then interestingly, Tyson certified a food plant with the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So events like that, that's what we're interested in tracking, food companies making decisions about their supply chain, looking back to agriculture, just how this whole thing interplays. Those were some of the top things leading that stewardship discussion. Now the weather is the second one I'd like to talk about. Weather is something impacting the entire food supply chain. Obviously, drought is huge right now, especially in the western half of the United States. And you could check, a good place to check there is the U.S. Drought Monitor. I'm going to attempt to share another graphic here just to give you an idea of the way this map looks here. The whole entire western half of the United States is either under extreme or exceptional drought. And what's interesting here is this doesn't necessarily affect just row crops. It's also food crops of all kind. In California, especially, not only is the drought impacting growing conditions there, but it's also the heat and wildfires and just this extreme weather and transportation is all impacted by this. So, it means a lot is bad. Farmers are canceling crops. They're deciding not to plant crops, and they're canceling things like CSA programs. That's what does it stand for? Consumer. Kyle will know, but he's muted.
Community supported agriculture.
Sorry, agricultural programs. Yeah, those things are getting canceled. So a great quote we picked up out of a Bloomberg article that I think really sums it all up. Extreme weather is slamming crops across the globe, bringing with it the threat of further food inflation at a time costs are already hovering near the highest in a decade and hunger is on the rise. So all of this stuff is coming together. The weather is also impacting workers. The heat is, forcing a lot of conversations about farm worker working conditions. And even food service. In the Pacific Northwest, a lot of restaurants were closed just because it was so hot in Seattle and Portland. So weather is huge. And that's, also obviously directly tied into climate change. And I can remember 2 years ago, we were giving a similar talk to some dairy farmers. And I asked, summer of 2019, what's the biggest topic? The weather. But at that time, just 2 years ago, massive flooding throughout the Midwest was of major concern, flooding a lot of row crops there. So it's just these weather extremes that's also forcing tons of discussions that we're keeping tabs on. And then, from a regulatory perspective and legislative perspective, at an April climate summit, the Biden administration pledged to cut greenhouse gases by half by 2030. That's kind of in line with a lot of what the food industry is doing. And to do that from a national regulatory perspective was a big deal, turning kind of the tide of conversations, towards climate and stewardship nationally. So Betsy later on will talk a little bit about where that conversation was from like an international trade perspective. Now it's, some of the most influential talks are focused on climate kind of stuff. So interestingly tied into the, this is more of a gossipy story, but from the Biden announcement, it got misinterpreted by a British tabloid to mean that people should shy away from eating beef. So that, started a huge kerfuffle among a lot of the, food journalists. The rumor was dispelled by Tom Vilsack from the USDA, but it caused a lot of agitation and discussion. One piece of fallout from there, the recipe site Epicurious, not directly because of, but just kind of around that same time, decided to ditch all beef recipes. So this is all really, it's just, to me, it's just fascinating how the interplay between climate change and, a recipe website can touch all aspects of this. So check out the report. You can read it probably much more lucidly than I tried to explain it there. I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Rado now, who will talk about workforce and protein.
Thanks, Nick, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to dive into a couple of other topics, and just for a couple of minutes. First, the workforce. With the economy opening up, again, looking back over the last quarter, a tight labor supply has really limited the ability of food companies to return to normal. We've seen every link in the supply chain, face a shortage in the supply of workers. And I think what's becoming clear is this is going to take, a while to correct itself. Low wages and working conditions are definitely concerns that have risen to the top. Eater's Dallas editor Amy McCarthy argued that the wages in food service are just too low, even without competition from unemployment benefits, which I know has been heavily discussed. And then kind of as Nick alluded to a little bit regarding farm workers, agricultural groups met with senators in June to try to work to alleviate some of the staffing pressures on farms by working to update some of the H-2A visa program, just to shore up more availability in workers there. So obviously worker safety, amid the pandemic has remained a hot topic, and that's only going to continue as now we're seeing cases surge and mask mandates going back into place. So just a few things to look, to continue to look for on that front. And then separately, related to the workforce, a couple of high-profile court cases were interesting, and we wanted to highlight those as it relates to worker issues. So the Supreme Court ruled on two cases, one regarding Nestle and Cargill, finding that they cannot be held responsible for child slavery that's practiced by their cocoa suppliers in foreign countries. So a pretty significant decision there. And then a second decision ruled that unions cannot enter privately owned farms to recruit workers. A federal district court judge also ruled that the USDA failed to consider worker safety issues when it implemented the new swine inspection system, which was implemented last year. So again, some pretty significant decisions affecting some pretty big food companies or food industries here in the US. And then I'll shift gears just real quickly to talk a little bit about protein and our tracking of it as a macronutrient. We saw an uptick in discussions and interest in it compared to such things as like fat and carbohydrates, for example. So meat consumption, again, not surprisingly, rose, continued to rise sharply in the early phases of the pandemic and continued through the last quarter. And, this despite what we've seen are a lot of headlines and a lot of like venture capital investment announcements in the plant-based protein alternative space. So we're seeing a ton of consumption of meat. We're seeing a lot of headlines, though, at the same time in plant-based protein. I think Dennis touched on this earlier, though, that the popularity of chicken continues to rise. Chicken wings and fried chicken sandwiches have resulted in shortages. So food industry is struggling, food service in so many ways. They're getting shorted on chicken because of those successful product launches, fast food especially. Interestingly, Wingstop in June, though, launched a new line of products called the Thigh Stop to kind of counter and highlight what was available. So kind of just some fun things happening. And then lastly, on the innovation front, it's worth noting that we've tracked a lot of developments in that cell cultured meat space as companies are really looking to scale and commercialize products. We saw some developments with beef, seafood, and chicken. And I think just lastly, to cut myself quick and give time for Michelle, hunger. Wanted to touch on hunger. And although hunger and food insecurity has been, remains a prominent and very real topic in the US and globally, it was much less discussed among the voices that we monitor. So evidenced as the ranking declined, but it's very much a real issue. So just something we wanted to note there. So with that, I will pass it over to Kyle, who's going to talk about the evolving definition of good food.
Yes. So one of the longer term trends that we've tracked, in addition to some of these other categories, is how these voices that we follow define what makes food good. And there are all kinds of different interpretations. And we're actually going to have a webinar on August 25th that will dive into this with some other food brand marketers and talk through their approaches and some of the things we've found. In the meantime, we also have some data that we dug up from our larger database. And so in this chart over my shoulder here, it might be a little difficult to see some of the details, but the red section there would be nutrition. So whether a product is low fat or high in protein, elements like that. That's been a very consistent trend over time. We've also seen some of the other big categories here. We've got taste and other sensory aspects. So how appealing is your product? We also have sourcing, and we've split that up into 3 different categories for the sake of this. We have ingredient sourcing, we have environmental oriented sourcing, and sourcing for more community elements. So in this chart up above my shoulder, if I can get my finger to show up, here we go. The blue one here is, the light blue one is the ingredient sourcing. So that would be more claims like your kind of clean label ingredients. Is this free from X kind of product? Is this an organic product? Conversations like that, we saw a lot of interest in that back in 2015. GMOs and organic were all over the news. More recently, that has been less of an issue, but it's still very much present. It's just not headlines, it's not front of mind all the time. Above that, we have in kind of the darker blue there is environment. And that is something that has grown substantially over the last 8 years or so. It used to be part of, like, a smaller part of sourcing, and has more recently become a major aim for companies. We've seen certainly different brands aim to make that their core tenet, as we're going to promote this as this is a more sustainable product. And at the top is the smallest line, and it's very difficult to see over my shoulder at the moment, but you can see that in the full report. That is community sourcing, community-oriented sourcing. And in the past year, we've seen that nearly double in volume as people worry more about how their brand's messaging looks for different kinds of communities. With COVID, it's how can they help other people deal with a pandemic? How can they alleviate hunger? With more racially oriented tensions last year especially, you saw a lot of brands adjusting their branding and also investing more in different communities. So these sorts of definitions are changing over time. Companies are looking at different ways to approach this and kind of take holistically, what is our product beyond just how does a person enjoy the food when they're eating it? How can they also think about the food and what makes it good from that perspective? And with all of that, I will wrap that up and pass it on to Dennis to chat with Michelle here.
Thanks, Kyle. You know, you talk about defining good and things like that. Well, Michelle has got a product. It's in the doggone name to begin with, and that goes all the way through the actual product, right through the mission. Michelle, let's just jump right in. I mean, you can, and I encourage people to go to GoodSport.com. I have no idea how she got that URL. It's amazing that it was available. But I think if you go there, let's just talk about how you got started. A lot of us have got ideas for products and, hey, this would be neat. Somehow you got it from an idea to the shelf. Could you just tell, as an entrepreneur, a little bit about that journey and how it came about?
Sure. So, I was looking for a source of hydration from that would be made from a natural source. I wanted truly effective hydration. I wasn't necessarily looking to innovate in dairy or any other, particular source. I just wanted hydration that would work. And I didn't want my son, all 3 of my children, but my son was being offered the leading sports drink at all of his baseball games. And I just didn't want that for him, the artificial ingredients, loads of sugar. And so we had read about athletes who would recover with chocolate milk. So I would bring that as a healthier alternative for after his athletics. And it just led me to this thought of, I wonder if milk could be this all natural, effective source of hydration that I'd been hoping for. And lo and behold, I did a little research and learned that milk is actually packed with electrolytes, and that scientific studies had shown milk is significantly more hydrating than traditional sports drinks and water. And so with that, I embarked on a journey of finding, some of the top experts in the world to help me turn milk into a sports drink.
But yet, it's funny you say milk, but you're talking about a different aspect of milk. It's not the white stuff thing. I mean, how do you treat milk for GoodSport? It's a different thing.
Yeah. So hopefully you can see this on your screen. This is
nice.
GoodSport. So it's clear. we ultrafilter milk to remove its protein and harness its electrolytes, vitamins, and carbs to create a sports drink.
Well, and that's it, and so it's also then upcycled, right? I mean, you use something that a lot of people don't, which is interesting.
Yeah. So, the way we were able to put milk into a format where it wasn't creamy and sitting in your gut when you're trying to work out was to ultrafilter the protein out. Okay. And we had interviewed, many high-ranking sports health professionals, and they love the idea of naturally occurring electrolytes, vitamins, and carbs coming from milk. But they did not like the idea of their athletes consuming the protein, which is a very high quality protein and great for recovery purposes, but not great for consuming before and during exercise because it's slower to digest. It can sit in the gut and cause some gastric distress issues. So when we were struggling with the milkiness of our drink, because when you're hot and sweaty, you want something refreshing and thirst quenching. And I asked the experts at the Center for Dairy Research who were helping us with the dairy application part of this, what's making it milky and how do we get rid of it? And they said the proteins. And I said, well, can we remove them? Yes, you can. All it takes is a little ultrafiltration. And so we removed it to have the clear product that that we have in our drink. But what I also learned is that dairy processors ultrafilter milk by the millions and millions of tons every day in this country to harness the protein to make things like protein powders, right? And then they don't have anything, to do with the rest of the milk that's this nutrient packed part of the milk, other than to send it off to farms for feed or dispose of it. And so we rescue and upcycle this part of the milk to create GoodSport. So it is a sustainably sourced main ingredient.
See, it's just amazing because it's such a pivot away from our expectations, and it's kind of, you talk about some of these people you've collaborated with, you get experts involved. How do you start those conversations? We have a lot of entrepreneurs who tune into these things. That's an interesting step you've taken, and how do you build those connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when I first read the study, it was a huge study out of the UK showing that milk is more hydrating than, it was like 13 other different beverages that they tested. I said to myself, well, this is amazing, but A, how do I know that this is valid science? I don't know these scientists, right? And by the way, if I decide to go through with this, like, who am I to say how many electrolytes need to go in a bottle and what the other components of a truly effective sports drink is going to be? So I asked around some doctors that I know, doctors that have worked with the Chicago Bears and the White Sox and things like that. And I said, do you know anybody that specializes in hydration? And they said, one of the people came back to me and said, one of the top hydration experts in the world lives here in Illinois. And I couldn't believe it. And so I looked him up and got in contact with him, and it's Dr. Bob Murray, and he's been working with me on this since day one. He was the founder and director of the Gatorade Sports Science Institute for over 20 years. He's written thousands of articles on sports hydration and has actually written the book, the only book on how to create, a properly formulated sports drink. And so, you just have to start asking around is the key. I didn't know him before, but I also thought, if you're going to find an expert, I don't know, one of the best in the world is a great place to start. You can always go down from there.
Indeed. It's funny. In a prior life, I too worked with Dr. Bob. He's an amazing guy. It's unbelievable. But this idea of the DMI, tell me about joining up with them and how, because this has got to be a pretty exciting thing for the industry to see, wow, this is an interesting solid new use of dairy products. That's got to be cool.
Yeah, it is. This is really the first foray into dairy as an option for thirst and hydration. And now we have also a lot of science. We haven't gotten to that yet either. Is science testing the drink and demonstrating that it actually is significantly more hydrating than the leading sports drink, and which is really incredible. So it presents a wonderful opportunity for dairy to offer dairy as a option for thirst and hydration. And then also options to be found, at retail and in new real estate. We are a shelf-stable product. It's lactose-free too, by the way. It's a shelf-stable product. You find it next to the sports drinks. You find it in the grab-and-go coolers. And so it is. And so we've had wonderful support from the DMI, the National Dairy Board, as well as regional and local boards who've been very excited, and even farmers groups who've reached out and are, cheering us on and offering their help and assistance in any way. It's pretty cool.
That's pretty amazing. And, we've had fun conversations about some of the interesting bumps along the road as an entrepreneur and things. And we've got a lot of entrepreneurs who tune into these things. You've been down on this amazing journey. I mean, to have this idea as you're watching your son play baseball and then commission studies, make these wonderful connections and try the product and build it. What have been like 2 or 3 of the biggest surprises you've discovered in this process? Because it's pretty singular.
Surprises. I mean, I guess that a human being can handle a lot of pain and distress and still continue on and keep her head up.
There you go.
And this was something I know you and I have discussed in the past. I mean, it's something about these types of talks too. I listen to, I don't know, hundreds of this at this point, podcasts, read articles. I've known Alan since he first launched Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network. And I always found these types of things so helpful, because when you hear of entrepreneurs, it's not that you're certainly not hoping that anybody endures these types of issues. Like a friend who shared a story about a train load of product that froze because the train got stuck in Chicago for a few days in January, and they had disposed of all the product. And I have read of another entrepreneur when they first got going, they were in glass bottles. Co-manufacturer let them know there could be shards of glass in some of their bottles. They had to dispose of the whole lot. And so those are not good things. But when you hear that they've happened to other people, if it sort of mentally prepares you to be thinking about those issues, so that when you're talking to a supplier, you're talking to your co-manufacturer, you can ask questions like, hey, what are we going to do to try to prevent this? Or if it happens, understand that you can take a deep breath and figure out a way around it because other people have.
That's well, speaking of asking questions, Nick, you said a good one came in. Why don't you go ahead and throw that out?
More of a statement from someone in the audience. I'm going to turn it into a question. So, and I think you addressed it a little bit by mentioning the lactose free, but how do you address the counterintuitiveness, the word from the question, that the general public may think that a dairy product contributes to mucus buildup and general congestion for people with colds? Like, what is the argument against that, or what's the?
So, like I said, I didn't come from within the dairy industry, so I'm not. It was never I was never, and I love milk, by the way, and it's never had a problem with it. But I just want to say this: there's a lot of research out there, and the fact is that the research shows milk does not cause mucus buildup. That's just sort of, I don't know, an old wives' tale or something, but that's not a fact. And if you get mucus buildup, like there's other reasons you get mucus buildup, and the fact that you might have had some milk, recently is sort of happenstance, So, and that's just from looking at the overarching research in the area, because I've had these questions come up. And so I said, I don't know, why does milk cause it? And I looked, and the research shows that it doesn't. So, and nobody has complained about that type of an issue with GoodSport either. So
great.
But that is interesting, because when we were developing creative for this, if you look at the lovely logo just above Michelle's right shoulder, you see in color, the droplet actually has, that's usually in one of the 4 brand flavor colors, like green and stuff. That little white at the bottom is actually to indicate dairy, but that's it. It's a very secondary part of the message. The bigger part of the message is this incredible amount of electrolytes and the enduring, lasting hydration. It's a wonderful support point, but I think, as Michelle knows, facts don't always convince people. We see, people will believe a bunch of different things, but it is an amazingly well-researched product. How has been the pitch been going to literally retail? I mean, what do you find the challenges there when you're taking your product there?
Knock on wood, not a lot of challenges. I mean, they want to know, how are we going to overcome consumers' perspectives of milk? That's totally
Yep.
fair. And the way that we're going to do that is through education and sampling, because once you taste it and, you know, it's got the consistency of a traditional sports drink, then, and in delicious natural flavors, by the way, then all the objections go by the wayside.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, and you talk about working with trainers, like sports trainers and different team trainers and things.
Oops.
While he's
You know, you were just
rebooting-
recently
there
done.
he goes.
Oh, wait, you cut out for a bit,
Oh.
Dennis. I'm sorry. Just repeat again.
Actually, I just frequently just freeze. No, you talk about working with trainers and things, and I weren't you were just down at a conference in Atlanta, wasn't it? Was it for
The National Strength and
and that
Conditioning.
with strength? So again, the natural message, is that your most resonant message with that group? Or, you know, because we talk about, you've got different audiences, obviously consumers, and you have the trade, but then you also have like these experts and these influencers. What are the big messages they want to hear from a sports drink?
Yeah, they want to hear that we have, you know, a high level of electrolytes, the broad spectrum of electrolytes. They're impressed by the fact that there's more electrolytes in this great tasting bottle of GoodSport than the leading pediatric oral rehydration solution. So they're impressed by those levels of electrolytes. We have the right balance of carbohydrate to not only promote hydration, but also improve performance. And we have the data, the research studies from, you know, a top tier university that ran these studies to back up these claims that we're making. We're really interested in just always being fact-based, if you will, to build the credibility around the product.
Right. You know, there's a question did come in, and how are you connecting just one-to-one with consumers? What kind of programs are you running right now, especially the hydration season?
So, you know, certainly on social media and using those tools that are available to us. But then again, you know, sampling opportunities, being at athletic events, giving people the opportunity to taste the product while they're hot and sweaty, because it was formulated to taste great and be thirst quenching. Our tastes change when we're working out. And so just giving people the opportunity to try it, interact with it, and see how they feel. And then go from there.
That's awesome. You know, we did get a question about, I realize you're still working on all your distribution stuff, but what's next? Are there other new products you're thinking of, or what would be the natural life cycle of development of GoodSport? What do you see?
I mean, we have a portfolio of products that we're planning on rolling out. We have new flavors we'll be rolling out soon, you know, and other innovations that we're considering, you know, have to do with the size of the pack and things like that. But yeah, this is, you know, GoodSport Nutrition is a sports nutrition brand. And so we have a full line of products we'll be rolling out over the next couple of years.
That's terrific. Again, Michelle, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? We will open it up now. If there are, type them on in.
I don't see any rolling in on the wires here, so
Nothing on the wire?
nothing on the wire.
I have a
Excellent.
question. If I
Yes.
wanted GoodSport today, and I do, where should I go and get it in the Chicagoland area?
We're in about 100 retail locations in Chicago. You can find them on our website right now. Pete's, Tony's, there's some 7-Eleven locations, Sunset, the Grand, and we're also available on Amazon and at goodsport.com.
Plus super hip places like Dom's in the north side of Chicago, you know, they're in all the places you want to be, Alan. That's where GoodSport is.
Well, there's a Pete's close to my house, so I think that'll be my first stop.
Great.
So that's great. Just Michelle, just congratulations on all you've put together. I remember when this was an idea and a PowerPoint and a passion in your heart, and it's so exciting to see all you've accomplished and just how far the product has come. So, I mean, just
Thanks,
bravo.
Al.
Absolutely.
And I can tell you that I have made some very important connections at Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network events, and I'm not kidding. I was, I was telling Dennis about it. It's a wonderful organization and an incredible community that you've created, and it has helped at least this entrepreneur get going. So I appreciate you.
That's so kind of you to say. Thank you so much for saying that and sharing that. And I'm going to tell my communications team, make sure we cut that out and like plug her endorsement all over everything. So
Well,
One last question came up. One last question did come up. I think we can just answer it because I think about it is a shelf-stable product.
yes,
GoodSport does not need refrigeration. So there you go.
correct.
So it just keeps amazing on every level. This literally should be in refrigerators and closets across the nation.
Well,
There
we'll
you
get
go.
them there. We'll get them there. I promise.
We will do our best. That's awesome.
outstanding. Well, again, thank you, Intel Distillery team. Amazing update. Really appreciate it. Michelle, thank you for letting us pick your brain and learn about all the challenges of creating this amazing product. And thank you, attendees, for spending some time with us.